this computer. Here we go. All right. All my YouTubers out there, welcome to My Life as a Landlord. Excited to have a great guest with me today, Frank Rohde. He's going to tell you all about fractional home ownership. And there's all kinds of fun things to do with landlord tax deferral as well. He's going to tell you all about it. Okay, let me start the audio. Hello there. Welcome to My Life as a Landlord. Thanks so much for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so excited for today's show. I have on the show today an innovative entrepreneur, one who saw a big problem that almost every community in North America is facing. First-time homeowners cannot buy homes. So my guest today has created an incredibly interesting program for first-time home buyers to choose a home they want and then buy the home as they live in it. And yes, I've even had Michael talk to Frank. This has really been fun. Here to talk to us today about fractional home ownership. Welcome, Frank Rohde. So happy to have you.
Thanks, Jen. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, this is really cool.
Our third conversation, so really excited, actually.
Yeah. And Frank, as you know, we've talked a bit about Canada, we've talked a bit about US, but you've got a twist in for Canada as well. Tell us a little bit about your background.
All right, so I'm originally from Germany, and every now and then you might hear that accent come through. But I came to the US as a young person eons ago, went to college on the East Coast, and then eventually made my way to San Francisco and worked for a consulting firm and then for FICO. But long story short, the connection to Canada was that I then ended up running a company, software company called Nomis Solutions. And that company built the pricing engine for a lot of the large mortgage lenders, including all of the Canadian, well, all big five Canadian banks. So I spent about 10 years flying back and forth between here and Toronto, and have been there, and love Canada, as I'm sure everyone else does too. You guys are just such kind and gentle people up there. Anyway, so that's my connection to Canada, but I'm back in San Francisco now, and that's where Ownify got started too.
Love it. So you're in San Francisco. I'm on Maui today. Very soon we're going to be traveling back up to Canada. And it's so funny when you say, oh yeah, the big five in Canada. And so from all my, if you're a US listener, it's big five in Canada. Let's see, HSBC, RBC, BMO, Scotiabank. What's the fifth one?
TD.
I've missed TD, right? Toronto Dominion. Yeah, which anyway, there's our pop quiz for the day. That's pretty funny. Okay, so the software companies in the rearview mirror, you wanted to keep solving problems. You had this incredible skill set in the banking industry, and you decided you were going to solve some problems. And what were you trying to solve?
Yeah, so at Nomis, I spent 15 years in the bowels of mortgage math, right? Which is super exciting for those of you who care. But at the end of the day, what I saw in the data with working with a lot of the large lenders is that the first-time buyer is getting squeezed out, right? And it's getting harder and harder for first-time home buyers in the US. And there's a bunch of reasons that are all coming together kind of at the same time, right? House prices, we all know, have continued to go up. We're short housing in the US. Mortgage rates have reverted back to higher and arguably what is the long run average, right? In the 5 and 6s, not in the 2s and 3s. That was an aberration. So you have house prices, you have mortgage rates, you have student debt, right? In the news all the time. Again, today, big problem weighing on people's budgets. And then you have private equity and investors, Wall Street, basically coming in, buying up single family homes, turning them into rentals, right? So all of those things are combining. And by the way, the mortgage interest tax deduction for first-time buyers is largely irrelevant, right? So you have all these things coming together that make it harder for the first-time buyer. And I kept seeing this in the data and eventually said, okay, I have skill set here and experience and background that helps solve this. And so I sold Nomis and then started a new company called Ownify about 2 years ago with backing from the same venture capital firm that had funded Ownify, that had funded Nomis originally. And so set out to really rethink, what does it mean to buy a house? How do we buy a house? How do we help people get into homes faster and sooner and potentially create savings for them along the way? And that's what we've been doing.
That's amazing. So how does Ownify work?
So how Ownify works is that we've challenged the notion that you need debt to buy a house, right? We've been buying houses kind of the same way for the last 70, 80 years, right? And Where that becomes a challenge is that mortgage companies generally require a significant down payment, and that's harder and harder to save for people. So what we've challenged is, how do you help people buy a home with a lower down payment? And when you do that with a loan, with mortgages, you create this moral hazard problem. And we saw this, in 2008, 2009, where people put zero down, bought a house, and then walked away, right? And it creates a huge risk. And so the only way that lenders have been able to deal with that is charge higher interest rates, which then again penalizes the home buyer, right? Or you add mortgage insurance, et cetera, but you're stacking up this monthly payment. So anyway, long story short, we said, what if you could buy a house as equity, i.e. without debt, right? What if you could pick a house, live in it, and buy fractions of the home over time? And so that's what we've built with Ownify. It's a debt-free way of purchasing a home and purchasing it through fractional ownership. So how does that work? The way it works is that we underwrite consumers, i.e. first-time buyers. We call them Ownies. And once someone is qualified based on their credit, their income, we give them a budget for a home. And generally, these are starter homes. So think of this as, 300, 400, maybe 500,000, but, a reasonable price starter home in most of America, not necessarily in Hawaii, not in San Francisco, but in a lot of, places. And then once the customer is qualified, they can go out and, look at any home on the MLS and pick a home, and we will buy it as an all cash purchase for the customer. We then fractionalize it into 10,000 bricks. Now, what's a brick? A brick is effectively a share, membership interest in a limited liability company that holds title to the home. So each home is held by its own LLC, its own legal entity, and the customer becomes a shareholder in that entity by virtue of buying 200 shares or 200 bricks, as we call it, on day one. And then over 5 years, which is the length of the program, customers buy incremental bricks, build equity, and at the same time pay rent for the bricks that they haven't bought. So over time, your rental payment goes down, your equity stack, your pile of bricks that you own increases, right? And therefore, you have to pay rent on fewer bricks. So think of it as fractional ownership, right? There's no obligation to ever buy the whole house. There's no mortgage balance, right, that you owe. You build equity, and you own that equity as membership interest in the LLC, and you rent the remainder from a pool of investors. Let me pause there and see whether that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it makes sense to me. I mean, I remember when we had talked just previously and learning about this business model. I mean, writing it down, I was in disbelief, going, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool." This is so cool because you don't the tenant slash owner doesn't have to take out a mortgage, because they could, if they could take out a mortgage, they would have taken out a mortgage. So this is very interesting to basically partner with Ownify to help buy, and then over time they buy out the bricks or the shares of the home. Now, why? Let's dive a little deeper. Why all cash offer for
So one of
Ownify
the
to buy
things
it?
one of the things we've seen that first-time buyers in particular are struggling with is getting their offer accepted, right? So maybe you qualify for a mortgage, you have an FHA mortgage with a low down payment, or you have a down payment assistance program, and you end up bidding on homes. And often what happens is that sellers look at those offers and say, well, if I can get an all cash offer from a, from a investor, right, or a private equity buyer, or a well-qualified all cash purchaser, I will take that offer over the one that has maybe a financing contingency or a second inspection like you have with an FHA mortgage, right? And so that's one of the big value props to our Ownies is we put you to the front of the line with an all cash offer. And between myself and my co-founder, we've bought over 5,000 homes, so we know how to negotiate on your behalf, right? We represent a group of investors who come in with you, so we really take the interests of the buyer, right, to heart, because we are the buyer to a large extent, right? We partner with you, and at the end of the day, we are investors in that LLC. So we also make sure that we drive a hard bargain to the seller. We do the right valuation and inspection and all that. But that's a long-winded answer to your question, that the cash offer is a big component of the value prop to helping that first-time buyer actually compete in the market.
Well, and it's interesting because as a first-time buyer approaches their first home, they're probably saying that they are battling credit, the down payment, income, all of these, their debt, like just what you had said, the student loan now is in there. But what they don't realize is that savvy real estate investors that have cash in hand and can close quickly is also a competitor.
Yeah.
And that's another reason that they don't realize, right, that they're losing out these houses. So Ownify, I love that. You put them right to the top and say, all cash offer. And so perfect. So these Onies, I love that you have that little nickname for them. I think that's fun. So Onies, sign up with Ownify. They get pre-qualified for a certain dollar amount. They go and find out whatever house they want to live in. They pick out the house that's within the budget for their for the Ownify agreement. And then what? You've got documents. You had said there's 3 documents they sign between Ownify and the tenant future owner. Now, how does that all work?
Yeah, so there's three components to the program. The first one is an equity purchase plan that basically outlines how much in equity, how many bricks are you buying every month, how much does that cost, right? And the way that math is dialed in is that you start with 2% or 200 bricks and you build your way up to 1,000 bricks or 10% of the total equity over 5 years. So that's the equity purchase plan. The second agreement is a lease agreement over the same 5-year horizon that basically governs your right to live in the home, right, as a long-term Oni. And we use that term because they're more than a tenant, right? They're a co-owner and co-investor. So with the equity share, you're a co-investor. With the lease agreement, you have the occupancy right for the property. And then the third agreement is an important piece, which is a purchase option. And that purchase option gives you the right to buy out the other investors at any point during those 5 years at the then current market value. So what that allows us to do is create this on-ramp where, let's say the Oni in year 3 has saved up enough, they had a promotion, they're making a bit more money, maybe they paid off their student debt, right? They now say, okay, I want to buy the house the traditional way with the mortgage. They can do that. They can exercise that option, right?
So they can go to their local credit union, their local bank, and say, I now have, in 5 years, it would be 10% equity. And at that point, the house is likely appreciated. It's clear title. There's no note to pay off
Yep.
necessarily, right? Now, of course, they're going to buy Ownify out, but then they can put a traditional mortgage and now they are the owner themselves, which is pretty incredible. So let's talk about the monthly payments. So you've got the equity purchase every month and then rent on top. That's a big payment. I'm assuming that's a big part of your underwriting when you qualify them as Onis, right?
Yeah, it's a little higher than what you would pay in rent for an equivalent property, right? Because you actually have the equity purchase on top of what is generally a market rent, right? Um, so the big saving is not so much on the monthly payment, it is on the upfront payment, right? The down payment, if you will. Now, when we look at the monthly payments and we compare that to what a customer would pay using a mortgage today, they're roughly comparable, right? And that's because mortgage rates are in the high 6s, right? And maybe low 7s. And so from that perspective, it's actually a pretty competitive value prop, right? And what a lot of first-time buyers forget when they look at the mortgage payment is, well, you're paying interest, you're paying principal, but you also have to pay property taxes and insurance, and you have to put some money aside for maintenance and repairs, right? And with Ownify, we wrap all of that into that single payment. So when the water heater needs replacing, or the HVAC, or the roof, or what have you, right? That is actually covered. And so from the perspective of all in, the Oni is actually better off than a mortgagor would be in that same situation.
Gotcha. Okay. So you've got lots of Onis right now, and you've got, all these different programs that are in motion. What kind of responses have you had so far? Have people bought out the houses yet? Has it been 5 years?
It's been way too early. So we've had 2023 was our first full year. We've had good returns and results on the portfolio, with 6% home price appreciation, 5.3% investor yield in terms of rental income. So that's been attractive. We've had one of the really interesting things in 2023, when you look at the portfolio results, our maintenance cost was about 60% lower than what you normally see for single family rentals, right? And so that was really encouraging because it goes back to this notion of the customers are not tenants, they're co-owners, and they treat the home that way, right? So we've had folks painting, we've had folks replacing floors, resurfacing, right, doing work in the homes, because ultimately it's their home, or at least they're on the path to making it their home. So that co-ownership mentality works really well. But to answer your question, so on the consumer side, we launched in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. We're adding Charlotte, and we're looking at a couple of other markets. And we've seen a lot of demand there, right? So on average, we get somewhere between 20 to 40 applications a day. And
Day.
a day, yeah. And today
Wow.
and that's just in that market, right? So
Right.
it's still in the early stages. And so we underwrite people, we put them on the wait list, and then we work with them to buy homes. And then on the other side is the Ownify Home Fund. And so that's where we're recruiting or marketing to accredited investors who come in and invest in the fund to enable the home purchases in the first place, right? And so
Right.
that's kind of a double bottom line investment, real estate returns, but you're also helping create a path to ownership for folks in your community.
Very
And
good.
so,
Very
so
good.
one of the really interesting things, and back to the title of the podcast and my life as a landlord, one of the things that we've been noodling on is how do we make this more broadly available to landlords, right, out there, to say, if I have a tenant, how do I help that tenant become an owner, right, in a structured way without necessarily incurring the risk of writing a seller note or structuring a program. And so we've gone through the legal work and the math and the structuring of that. And so one of the things we're exploring, and this is the conversation you and I have had, is how do we make this available to landlords to say, okay, maybe I have a tenant or 5 or 10 or more that I want to put onto that path to ownership, and over a 5-year or some horizon, I can do that using the Ownify program. And so that's the other opportunity here is, one, if you're a landlord, you can use our program and with your own tenants, or if you want to sell your home into the Ownify fund, we can do that as well, right? And that's an interesting value prop to say, if you're at some point looking to sell your home, right, with a tenant in it, and there's a tenant that potentially can become an owner, we can facilitate that transaction.
Yeah, that's been a bigger conversation, especially in the last few weeks with us attending the real estate conference. There's been a lot of discussion about how can we help, because this gap is getting worse. It's getting
Yeah.
harder for these single home buyers, sorry, first time home buyers, uh, buying their first home. And I see a lot of landlords who are, let's face it, they're tired. They don't want to be a landlord anymore necessarily. Some of them are new, but there's a lot of folks who are saying, you know what, maybe I should just sell the house. But they always go, gosh, I wish that tenant could just buy it from me. Well, we needed a vehicle, and Ownify is definitely one of those vehicles you could do. But there in the US, there is a capital gains deferment tool, 721 exchange. Now, my Canadian listeners, if you're a Canadian listener, I'm sorry, this does not apply in Canada, but it does apply in the US. So I'm betting that many have not ever heard of a 721 exchange. Can you explain a little bit about that?
So yeah, I will try.
You'll
That
try.
all being said, I'm not an accountant. I'm not a tax attorney. So you have to get your own advice.
Yeah,
However,
fair enough.
everyone I think is familiar with a 1031 exchange as a real estate investor, as a landlord, right? Where you exchange the proceeds of a sale into the investment into the next real estate property. A 721 exchange works somewhat similarly in that you can take capital, in particular capital that's tied up in real estate, and you sell the real estate to a fund, which in this case would be the Ownify Home Fund, and your proceeds on that sale are not taxed at the point where you're selling the home, because the proceeds are shares in the Ownify Home Fund, right? So let's say you have a $400,000 property and you're selling it to the Ownify Home Fund, you will get $400,000 worth of shares, right, in the fund. And that transaction at that point is not taxed. It is taxed when you eventually sell those shares, in 5 or 10 years, whatever have you, And at that point, you're incurring the capital gains tax. So taxes will catch up to you eventually, just like they do with a 1031 exchange.
Yeah.
But this is a way for landlords in particular to get out of the active landlording business, put their home, including the existing tenant, into a fund potentially, with a tax advantage transaction, and then eventually sell down or sell those shares in the fund, including the appreciation and rental income that you've generated along the way, right? And so it's an interesting tax planning tool that I don't think a lot of folks are familiar with.
No, I think
So
it's
if
great.
any listeners out there are interested, ping me, and happy to walk you through and explore whether that's an option.
Excellent. What's next for you in Ownify? Sounds like you're expanding to Charlotte. Are you going to expand further than that?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at all 300 odd real estate markets. So we've built a model, and that gives us a little bit of guidance. And then we do a lot of, quite frankly, on the ground research, talking to realtors, right? Really trying to understand the market and the dynamics in a particular market to say, is this the right one to move into? So that's how we landed in Raleigh. Great exception or reception there. Charlotte next, Nashville. We're looking at South Carolina. So a number of other markets. And eventually, I mean, the goal for us is, right, over the next 10 years, we want to help 100,000 people into homes. And that means we're going to be national eventually. But we're also looking at this as, a crawl, walk, run exercise, right? Building both the capital and the investor side and then the ONI side at the same time.
Amazing. So if a listener wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way they can do that?
Come to the website, ownify.com, OWNIFY, or ping me directly at frank@ownify.com. And yeah, and my phone number, 415-549-1939. Call me directly as well.
Sounds great. So check out ownify.com, or if you are interested in a 721 exchange, I encourage you to talk to your local tax professional. They can help you figure out if that is an option for you. Well, Frank, every time I learn more about Ownify, I always find it so innovative and just amazing because everybody's trying to figure out how can we solve some of these issues. I just love that you guys have become so innovative. I think it's super neat. And I know this is not going to be the last time we talk about this. Love to have you on the show later this year. Is that okay?
That would be great. Would love to. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Jen. See you soon.
Awesome. Yeah, hang on just a sec. So for all my listeners out there, don't forget the resources, mylifeasalandlord.com. Next week, we are talking about financing through credit unions, another innovative wrinkle, credit unions versus banks. Mark Ritter is going to be joining us. I will see you there. Thanks again, Frank.